Spread the word of Islam. Oh, fortunate one, paradise must be won. Paradise must be won each day and each night, through darkness and through light. Cry it out to the world. Spread the word. Spread the word, oh man. Spread the word of Islam.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is Riyad Ansari. Welcome to the second episode of our discussion, our comparison of Buddhism and Islam. One of the things that scholars say about Buddhism is that it's the only atheist religion in the world. Actually, the Buddha, according to one famous episode, he didn't deny and he didn't affirm. There was a man who asked him, does the world have a creator? And he said, look, if somebody's been shot by an arrow and you're the doctor, are you going to concern yourself with who made the arrow, or are you going to treat the patient? So, in other words, it's as if he was saying the issue is really irrelevant. Of course, for Muslims, when we say that right view is important, as in the earlier episode, I mentioned that the first step in the eightfold path to enlightenment in Buddhism is a right view. So we as Muslims would agree that right view is critical to embarking on the path of spiritual advancement. But we as Muslims would say that the absolute basis and the essence and the summation of the right view is the affirmation of God's existence, not only His existence, but His perfection and His supreme right to be worshipped. Why? Because He's the one who gives us all that we need. We're dependent upon Him, and He doesn't need us. So, if you don't deal with that issue, from our point of view, I mean, you haven't dealt with the most important aspect of reality. So, we've been talking about, mainly, so far we've been talking about differences between Islam and Buddhism. But we do come to many areas of agreement and overlap. The second step on the Eightfold Path is right intention, which, according to the descriptions that I read, involves two major components. One is non-attachment to the world, and the other is compassion for the creation. And we would, as Muslims, have no trouble with these concepts. We would agree with them. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, be in this world as if you're a traveler, a wayfarer. And he said, with regard to compassion, الرَّاحِمُونَ يَرْحَمُهُمُ الرَّحْمَنُ. Those who are compassionate, the most merciful will have compassion upon them. But notice that you can't get away from that concept. Everything in Islam revolves around that concept of Allah is the one who is the focus of our attention. So intention in Islam is doing what you do for the sake of pleasing your Creator. The third step on the path is right speech, which means, among the things it means is that one should avoid lying. And of course, all people in the world would agree that lying is a bad thing. To avoid malicious speech, to avoid harsh speech. In relation to that, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, gentleness, whenever it's found in something, it beautifies it. And when it's not present in something, then that's a flaw. It's marred by the absence of gentleness. The fourth of those major aspects of right speech is avoiding idle chatter. The cognate of that with Islam is the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "Min husni Islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'ni." Part of the perfection of a person's Islam is his leaving that which does not concern him. The fourth step is right action. And the explanation of that in Buddhism has some major differences from the Islamic point of view. First, we agree with them, which is to avoid killing, but for Buddhism that's almost an absolute, whereas for Islam, in Islam, it is lawful for us to kill animals in order to eat their meat. And it's lawful for us to kill pests. And if you find a poisonous snake in your house or a scorpion, there's no problem at all. You can kill it. And of course, there is very much the idea that in certain situations fighting is required, and in the course of that fighting, people will be killed. Buddhism, although it doesn't see that as a good thing, still when Buddhism becomes the dominant religion of a state, there's no state in history that has not had conflict with armies and soldiers. So you find the Sri Lankans have an army, the Thais have an army, the Burmese have armies. So throughout history, wherever there's a state and a government, there are armies and there is fighting. So even within the Buddhist civilization, there is something to do with violence as a fact of life. In Islam, there are specific rules for when fighting is lawful and when it's not, and what the rules of warfare are. There are some aspects of the Buddhist concept of right action that Muslims can heartily agree with. For instance, avoiding intoxicants and avoiding gambling. With regard to the issue of celibacy, however, we have a major difference. According to Buddhism, the best condition for a person is celibacy. And that is because in order to have a reasonable chance of achieving enlightenment, you should be a monk, devoting most of your time to meditation, detaching yourself from the world. And because marriage involves physical relations with one's spouse, and this is a physical pleasure, it will increase your attachment to this world, and therefore it's a hindrance on the spiritual path. Of course, we know that in Islam, the famous hadith, quote-unquote, that's attributed to the Prophet ﷺ, La rahbaniyata fil Islam. Technically, that's not a hadith, but the concept is there. There is a hadith that has some weakness to it. It says, La sarurata fil Islam, narrated by Abu Dawood. There's no celibacy in Islam. And that concept is explicitly supported by a very authentic hadith where Uthman ibn Mad'un, he requested permission from the Prophet ﷺ to be celibate. And the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you cannot. And, you know, if we look around us, the empirical experience of religions that have this concept in them, such as Catholic Church, priests are not allowed to marry. It's like every couple of days or weeks there's something in the papers about some child who was abused by a priest, and now it's finally coming out. It's been happening throughout history, I'm sure. We just now live in an era in which the media is bringing these things to light. And and that's in Western societies where these issues are discussed openly. In more traditional and conservative societies, which include the Buddhist societies, these things are not discussed. So although they are probably happening, they're just not talked about. So celibacy is prohibited in Islam because it leads to corruption, because you're denying reality. Human beings have desires. If they're not expressed in a healthy manner, they will come out. These desires will be expressed in an unhealthy manner. The next issue, which is also has a relation, the Buddhist concept of it has, we have a problem with it as Muslims. The fifth step is right livelihood. Although we agree with the idea that if your earnings are halal, then that's good. And if your earnings are haram, then everything in your life will be poisoned by that. However, in Buddhism, because being a monk is the best thing, and monks should not be involved in the world, then monks, they get their livelihood by begging. And the Prophet ﷺ, and he completely prohibited begging. A person who begs without need, he will appear on the Day of Judgment with his face stripped of its flesh. And in the hadith of Bukhari, he said that it's better for one of you to get an axe and go cut firewood and put it on his back and sell it than to pass around begging, because it's not good. So the very epitome of piety in Buddhism is to be a monk and to beg. And in Islam, that's completely prohibited. So we'll take a break at this point, and we'll be back shortly. Assalamu alaikum.
Spread the word.